My name's Monroe. Yeah, I know, weird name. My mom thought it sounded presidential. My dad thought it sounded like a brand of steel. I've never felt like either of those things. This isn't easy to write, but I'm here because silence got me nowhere. So, a week ago, I turned 39. No big deal, right? I hadn't planned on making it a thing. No party, no dinner out. Just a quiet night with my wife, Dahlia, and maybe a glass of that cheap boxed red she pretends to hate. Dahlia, by the way, is sharp. Not just smart sharp. Like a glassed edge you don't notice until it cuts. She's charming when she wants to be, cruel when she doesn't care to hide it. And me? I'm the guy who apologizes when someone steps on his foot. The kind of man who keeps his head down and tries to be easy to love. Anyway, she insisted we go to her friend's art gallery that Friday night. Said there was an exhibit called Still Life Screaming. I remember thinking, wow, sounds like marriage. I almost laughed out loud. But that's not where this story really begins. We arrived at the gallery just past 7. Dahlia wore this deep green dress she hadn't touched in 2 years. I noticed, but didn't say a word. That's always been our dynamic. I see everything, say nothing. As we walked through the front door, everything went quiet. Then, surprise, dozens of faces turned toward me, all glowing under those soft, golden gallery lights. Balloons floated near the ceiling. My sister was there. My old boss. Even Dahlia's estranged cousin flew in from Phoenix. I stood there blinking, completely blindsided. It should have been the happiest moment of the year. I should have felt special. But I didn't. I felt surrounded. Smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Friends I hadn't spoken to in months, suddenly pretending we were close. And Dahlia, holding my hand just a little too tightly, like she was proud of something that hadn't happened yet. Still, I played along. I smiled, nodded, shook hands, hugged people I barely remembered. Someone handed me a drink. I think it was whiskey, but it tasted sour. Too much lemon, or maybe just a bad feeling. And then came the mic. A thin silver microphone resting in Dahlia's palm like a delicate knife. She tapped it twice. Feedback echoed through the speakers. Everyone turned. I want to say a few words, she said, brushing her hair behind one ear. About Monroe. My husband. My survivor. That word stuck. Survivor? People laughed, politely. She smiled wide, the kind of smile that hides everything. And for a moment, I believed she'd say something beautiful. Maybe a story about when we first met. A silly memory. Maybe even an apology for all the ways we'd been drifting apart lately. But what she said, what she chose to say, with that mic in her hand, in front of everyone who ever mattered to me, changed everything. I remember the first sentence. Every syllable, every breath. It carved itself into the walls of my mind. I used to joke that Monroe was like wallpaper. Always there. Never asking for too much. Easy to ignore. People chuckled. A few even clapped. I didn't laugh. I didn't even blink. I just listened as the woman I'd built a life with, shared a bed with, paid bills beside, unraveled my identity like it was the punchline of her set. And I wish I could tell you that was the worst part. But the worst part came next. And it still echoes. I'll tell you what she said. I'll tell you everything. Because when I walked out that night, I didn't just leave a party. I left the version of me that accepted being invisible. She didn't stop after that first sentence. I stood there, still holding that watered-down whiskey, my hands sweating against the glass, as Dahlia continued with her little roast. That's what it became, a roast. Not a tribute. Not a heartfelt confession. Just a series of carefully crafted digs delivered with charm and precision. She was a surgeon with a mic and a crowd. I mean, let's be honest, she said, laughing. Monroe isn't exactly the kind of guy who takes charge. You ask him where he wants to go to dinner and he'll say, wherever you want, babe. Every time. For 12 years. More laughter. Louder this time. I looked around the room and caught my sister's eyes. She offered a tight smile, then looked away like she didn't want to be seen watching. I remember when we were dating, Dahlia went on. I told my best friend, he's the safest man I've ever met. I could marry him and never have to worry about anything exciting happening ever again. That got a real reaction. Someone in the back whistled. She smiled like a performer hitting her mark. And guess what? I was right. That's when my stomach turned. There was no warmth in her voice, no teasing love beneath the words. It wasn't playful, it was surgical. And not once did she look at me while she said it all. She stared into the crowd, into the camera someone was holding. Probably already thinking about how this would look in clips. She was building a moment for herself. I was just the stage. I remember feeling a strange kind of out-of-body stillness. Like I was watching myself from a corner of the room, not standing in the center of it. I saw my own shoulders fall slightly. I saw the twitch in my jaw. And I knew what was happening. I was shrinking. Again. But that wasn't the worst part. It was when she said, "I always told Monroe he was the kind of man you settle with. You know? You marry him when you're done chasing the real fun." I mean, I wasn't looking for fireworks. I just wanted peace. And that's what he gave me. A quiet little life. That one landed. I heard it like a slap across my ears. I looked at her then. I really looked at her. Her cheeks were slightly flushed. Her lips curled into that smile she always used when she knew she'd gone too far and didn't care. I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years, satisfaction. As if humiliating me in front of the people I cared about was some kind of long overdue confession. I looked around the room again. I saw people laughing, sure, but not everyone. My friend Caleb stood stiff in the corner, arms crossed, jaw tight. He knew me. He'd seen me hold Dahlia's hair back when she got food poisoning on our honeymoon. He knew how many times I'd given up things to keep our marriage stable. The job offers I turned down. The hobbies I dropped. The silent compromises. And here she was, summarizing my entire existence as quiet wallpaper. But you know what really got me? She paused, looked directly into the mic, and said, "Monroe, you're not the love of my life. But you're the man who showed up when I needed one. And for that, I'm grateful." Applause. Applause. I don't even remember how I put the glass down. I just remember the sound it made against the gallery's little folding table. A light clink. That's it. I didn't look at her. I didn't look at anyone. I just walked. Through the crowd. Past her friends. Past the balloons and the fake smiles and the faces I no longer recognized. Out the gallery door. Into the cold. I didn't run. I didn't slam anything. I didn't cry, not yet. I just walked. Because in that moment, I realized something painfully simple. I had stayed with a woman who saw me not as a partner, not even as a person, but as a placeholder. A dependable seat filler until someone more exciting came along, or until she got bored enough to say it out loud with a microphone in her hand and an audience waiting to cheer. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have my phone, my coat, or even my car keys. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally doing something that was mine. Not because she asked. Not because it was easy. But because I couldn't let myself sit there a second longer. That was the night I left. Not just the party. Not just the gallery. I left the version of myself who tolerated being treated like a background character in his own life. And I had no idea what would happen next. But I swear to you, Reddit, I was about to learn that the party wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the trapdoor. And it had only just swung open. The cold hit me like a slap. Not just the wind, but the silence too, that hollow, stunned kind of silence you get after walking out of a building filled with people, laughter, and artificial light. The moment the door closed behind me, it was like I stepped into a different world. The sound of my shoes on the wet pavement echoed louder than any applause I just heard. I remember staring at the sky and seeing nothing, just gray, thick clouds that felt as heavy as my chest. I stood outside the gallery for maybe 2 minutes. Maybe 10. I wasn't keeping track. Time didn't feel linear anymore. I didn't want to leave, but I couldn't stay. That was the problem. There was nowhere to go. I didn't even have my wallet or keys. They were in my coat, which I had hung up inside the same building where my wife was still holding court like some kind of off-Broadway comic. I walked. I didn't know how far or in which direction. I passed a couple holding hands, a cab with its headlights off, a bakery that had just closed. The world was moving. People were laughing, buying pastries, living. And I was wandering. 39 years old and suddenly realizing I had no idea who I really was outside of being someone's safe option. The worst part? I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was just humiliated. Embarrassed in a way that didn't leave bruises but burned. You ever stand in a room full of people and feel like the only one who didn't get the joke? That was me. Everyone else seemed in on it, like they'd been laughing at my expense for longer than I wanted to admit. And maybe they had. Maybe I was the only one who still believed I was in a marriage built on love rather than performance. After about 20 blocks, I finally sat on a bench at an empty bus stop. That's where it started sinking in. All the things I'd been ignoring for years. All the little dismissals, the offhand remarks, the way Dahlia rolled her eyes when I talked about my job or flinched when I reached for her hand in public. How had I missed it all? Because I wanted to. I wanted to believe that being dependable would be enough. That being good, kind, consistent, that it would matter. But it doesn't. Not to everyone. To some people, those traits are invisible. To people like Dahlia, they're boring, predictable, forgettable. I kept playing it back in my head. That moment she called me the man you settle with. It wasn't just cruel. It was revealing. It meant she never saw me as a partner, just a pit stop. A placeholder. Something to lean on while she figured herself out. And then the memory that really crushed me hit like a punch to the ribs. Her phone call 2 weeks before the party. She was in her car, rushing between errands, and she told me she had a huge surprise planned. Said I'd never forget it. I thought she meant something beautiful, a weekend trip, maybe, something thoughtful. I even caught myself daydreaming that she might have planned a vow renewal. I know how dumb that sounds now. But back then, I was still convincing myself she cared in a way she never did. I sat on that bench until my phone buzzed. A text from Dahlia. Where are you? No apology. No concern. Just 3 words, like she had lost track of her purse. I didn't answer. I put the phone in my pocket and stared across the street at the closed-up diner. There were reflections in the windows, not of me, but of the man I used to be. The one who would have run back, said sorry, found a way to make her feel better about her public disrespect. The one who would have apologized just to keep the peace. That version of me was fading by the minute. Then, another text. You're overreacting. It was just jokes. Everyone laughed. That one hit me harder than anything she said into that microphone. Because in just a few words, she stripped away the very thing I'd needed most, acknowledgement. All I wanted was for her to recognize what she'd done. Not even apologize, just admit it had been cruel. But she couldn't even do that. Because it wasn't a joke to me. It was a line crossed, loud and public. A betrayal dressed up as humor. And as I sat there, shivering, coatless, heart breaking open in slow motion, I finally realized something I never wanted to admit. Dahlia didn't just lose respect for me. She never had it in the first place. She saw me as a fixture. A default setting. Something that didn't need to be nurtured or protected, just tolerated. And the party? That wasn't the punchline. It was the curtain drop. But it wasn't over yet. Because the real twist, the thing that would change everything, hadn't even happened. Not until I found the voicemail. The one she left by mistake. The one that wasn't meant for me. And it shattered everything I thought I understood about that night. I didn't plan to check my voicemail. In fact, I nearly threw the phone into the gutter. That's how numb I felt, like none of it mattered anymore. I figured I'd go back to my apartment, pack a bag, and crash somewhere else for a while. I had a friend, Milo, who owed me a favor from way back when. Maybe he had a spare couch. I wasn't thinking long term. I just needed to not be near her. Not be near anyone who clapped at what she said. But right as I was getting up from the bench, the phone buzzed again, a notification this time. One new voicemail from Dahlia. I stared at it. Part of me assumed it'd be another version of what she'd already texted, some half-hearted attempt to explain herself, or worse, a guilt trip. I wasn't ready for that. I didn't want to hear her voice in my ear. Not yet. Not after what she said. Still, my thumb hovered over the play button. Something in me, curiosity, instinct, maybe something more desperate, wanted to hear it. Needed to know if she meant even a shred of what she'd said on that stage. I wanted to catch her off guard. Maybe, just maybe, I thought I'd hear her break. That I'd hear something real. What I got was worse. Much worse. It was a pocket dial. You could tell right away. No greeting, no awareness of the phone being on. Just a burst of static. Then the sound of her voice, faint but unmistakably hers. She was laughing. Not nervous laughter. Not stressed. It was the kind of laughter that comes after a successful prank. That low, self-satisfied giggle she only ever used when she thought she was in control of everything. And then I heard a second voice. Male. Confident. Deep. You think he bought all that? The man said. Dahlia laughed harder. Monroe? Please. He probably thinks I still respect him. Poor guy? You could see it on his face. Deer in headlights. My whole body went cold. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath. The man replied, You nailed it though. That line about him being wallpaper? Brutal. Even I felt that one. She snorted. That was the point. I needed him to feel it. He needed to be shaken. And besides, it was overdue. I've spent years tiptoeing around his ego. Tonight? That was for me. Pause. Clinking glass. More laughter. Then, do you think he'll leave? The man asked, sounding almost hopeful. I hope so, Dahlia said flatly. Honestly, I don't know what I'd do if he stays. That was it. The voicemail cut off right there, like the universe had decided that was enough damage for one night. But the words kept echoing long after my phone screen went black. I don't know what I'd do if he stays. That was what she really thought of me. Not just boring. Not just safe. I was a burden. A passive inconvenience. A man she didn't have the courage to leave. So instead, she tried to humiliate me into leaving her. It wasn't carelessness. It was strategy. The entire party was a setup. A performance. She orchestrated it. Not to celebrate me, but to push me out. And the man on the voicemail? He wasn't just some friend. There was an ease in their voices, a shared history in how they spoke. It was casual, like they'd done this before. This wasn't a slip. It was a campaign. I sat back down on the bench and didn't move for a long time. The streetlights flickered overhead, and I felt like I was floating outside my own life. Because the truth wasn't just painful, it was humiliating. I had become so small in my own marriage that the woman I loved thought she could erase me publicly and I'd still come crawling back. And maybe she was right about who I used to be, because the old Monroe might have forgiven it, might have chalked it up to stress or too many drinks. The old Monroe would have listened to that voicemail, then gone home, apologized for ruining the night, and asked if she needed space. But that Monroe was gone. I knew it then, knew it without rage, without drama. I was done, not out of revenge, not to prove a point, but because I finally saw what I had refused to accept for years. She didn't love me. Maybe she never had. I walked another 8 blocks and finally stopped at a 24-hour diner. I sat at the counter and ordered black coffee. The waitress didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer any. I just sat there, staring at the old cracked linoleum, wondering how I had spent over a decade living in a version of my life that wasn't mine. And that's when I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Milo. Not to ask for a couch, but to ask for help finding a lawyer. Because the party may have been the spark, and the voicemail may have been the gasoline, but the fire was just getting started. I had no idea that what Dahlia had done went deeper. Much deeper. And that voicemail? It wasn't the only thing I wasn't supposed to hear. Milo answered on the second ring, sounding half asleep and half suspicious. We hadn't talked in months, and the last time we did, it was over a busted air conditioner in my office. But he answered anyway. That's just the kind of guy he is. Monroe, he said, groggy but alert. It's almost midnight. You good? I didn't know what to say at first. My mouth opened, then shut. My voice caught in my throat, and all I could manage was, I need a favor. And it's not small. To his credit, Milo didn't ask 20 questions like most people would have. He didn't demand an explanation or joke about how long it had been. He just asked, do you need me to come get you? 25 minutes later, I was in the passenger seat of his old truck, holding a thermos of gas station coffee and trying to piece my thoughts together in real time. I played the voicemail for him, only once. He didn't speak while it played. He didn't even blink much. Just gripped the wheel a little tighter, jaw working side to side like he was grinding the words between his teeth. When it ended, all he said was, she planned it. I nodded. I know. No, man. I mean really planned it. That wasn't off the cuff. That was rehearsed. Scripted. Practiced. I wanted to disagree, but I couldn't. I kept replaying her timing, the pauses for laughter, the way she delivered each line like she had an internal applause meter. It wasn't just cruelty, it was theater, and that terrified me more than anything. Milo offered to let me stay the night at his place, but I declined. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't be still. I needed to move, to act, to do something, even if it was small. So we stopped by his office downtown. He ran a small private investigations firm. Nothing big, just him and a few friends from his army days who were good at digging quietly. I asked him if he could find out who the man in the voicemail was. I already have a guess, he said, unlocking his office door. But I'll confirm it. I didn't ask what the guess was. I had one too. And I didn't want to be right. He gave me his couch and a blanket. I didn't sleep. The next morning, after a shower that felt more like a pressure wash to my soul, I sat at Milo's small conference table while he pored over phone records, digital histories, and photos he somehow pulled from Dahlia's socials, even the private ones. I didn't ask how. He was always a little too good at that. And then he paused. He turned the laptop to me slowly, like he didn't want to say it out loud. On the screen was a photo, taken 2 weeks before my birthday, at a small restaurant in a part of town I hadn't even been to. Dahlia, dressed up, laughing across the table from a man I didn't recognize immediately, not because I didn't know him, but because I didn't expect him. It was our marriage counselor. We hadn't seen him in over a year, and we only went for 3 sessions. He was the one who told Dahlia that I was emotionally present but passively avoidant. She hated that phrase. Or so I thought. Turns out, she liked it just fine when it applied to someone she was having dinner with, alone, outside of any professional context. I stared at the image for what felt like hours. Milo's voice cut through the fog. His name's Elliot Grant. Licensed counselor. No criminal record. But he has a history of getting too close to certain clients. Quiet settlements. NDA-type situations. My mouth went dry. So I don't have concrete proof of anything physical, he said, raising his hands, but this wasn't a one-time thing. She's seen him 6 times in the last 3 months. All off the record. All private meetings. Restaurants. Hotel bars. Never at his office. I didn't know what to say. Betrayal I could process. But this felt deeper. It wasn't just cheating. It was calculated deception wrapped in professional trust. She had used our marriage therapy, something I had suggested to help us, as a gateway to get close to another man. It all started to make sense now. Her refusal to go back to counseling. The way she dismissed my concerns with vague comments like, "I just feel better now." The subtle way she made it seem like she'd grown, when in reality, she had just replaced me emotionally and mentally. But that still wasn't the end of it. Milo handed me a printout of an email thread. It had been forwarded to him by a mutual friend who worked IT for a local event planning company, the same one that hosted my party. The email was from Dahlia. Subject line, surprise party, final script. My vision blurred. I sat down. There were bullet points. Laugh lines. Jokes marked with pause for effect. It was written like a performance. Not a spontaneous speech. Not a tribute from the heart. But a stage play. She wrote it out. She timed the jokes. She rehearsed the cruelty. And at the very bottom of the email, underlined, was a note. The goal is to make him question everything, but don't push too hard. If he stays, I need a fallback plan. Fallback plan. That was the moment the air left my lungs. Because I finally saw it for what it was, not just emotional neglect or passive disrespect, but a long game of emotional manipulation. She wanted out, but clean. She wanted to push me to leave so she could keep the sympathy, the friends, the story. Because in her version of the story, Monroe was the man who couldn't handle a strong woman. The man who abandoned her. But not this time. Not anymore. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to fight. But I was going to write my own ending. And Dahlia had no idea what that would look like. I didn't go back home that day. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not even to grab clothes. I didn't want to breathe the same air that had absorbed her rehearsals. I couldn't stand the thought of stepping into a kitchen where she'd practice smiling while stabbing me in the ribs with jokes masked as affection. Our home had turned into a theater set, and I was the unwitting extra who didn't know he was the final scene. Instead, I stayed at Milo's office. It wasn't glamorous, old blinds, buzzing fluorescent lights, a couch with stuffing peeking from one arm, but it was real. Nobody lied to me in that space. Nobody smiled while sharpening knives. And for the first time in years, I started sleeping. Not well, not soundly, but the kind of sleep that comes after a fever breaks, raw, aching, but clean. Milo worked quietly in the background. He wasn't one to push, but he did offer one piece of advice that stuck with me. Don't play her game, Monroe. She made this theatrical. You make it surgical. So I did. I didn't call Dahlia. Didn't text her. I didn't even reply to her escalating list of messages, which evolved from fake concern to passive-aggressive guilt trips, to straight-up irritation. You can't just vanish like this. So this is how you act now? I thought you were more mature than this. Seriously, grow up. Each one read like a thread being pulled from a sweater that had already unraveled. There was no, "Are you okay?" or "Let's talk." Just blame. Just noise. Just Dahlia, trying to control the narrative before she even knew what it was. But I was done being part of her story. I was writing my own now. The first thing I did was call my bank. Then my HR department. Then the joint account manager at the credit union where our savings sat like a quiet witness to our mutual history. I took my name off everything except what was mine. I left her half untouched. I didn't want a single cent that could be spun into her next sob story. I opened a separate account and rerouted my paycheck. I canceled the shared utilities. I left the car, the house, the furniture. All of it. Because none of it mattered anymore. None of it felt like mine. Every couch, every wine glass, every drawer of old movie ticket stubs, They were all stained by the performance I didn't know I'd been living through. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that our marriage had never really been ours. It had been hers. Her show. Her script. Her spotlight. I was just the guy holding the mic stand in the dark. But not anymore. It was Milo who helped me draft the letter. Not to Dahlia. To her lawyer. We weren't even in divorce territory yet, technically. But Milo said if I wanted to stay in control of the narrative, to protect myself, I needed to get ahead of it. So I did. The letter was short. Professional. Cold. Effective immediately, I am vacating the shared residence and removing myself from all financial entanglements. This decision is final. I will not be seeking mediation at this time. Please direct any correspondence to my legal representative moving forward. No emotion. No vulnerability. No cracks for her to crawl into and manipulate. Just walls. Steel ones. I made one stop before leaving town. The gallery. Not during business hours. Not when it was full of wine-sipping guests and hollow praise. I went early, before opening, while the janitor was still mopping the tile floors. I didn't go to see Dahlia, she wasn't there. I went to see the room. The space where she broke me. Where her words danced through the air like poison dressed in punchlines. I stood in the center of the gallery, stared up at the track lighting, and whispered to no one. I know who I am now. It wasn't dramatic. No music. No applause. Just me and the truth. A quiet moment between the version of me that let things slide and the version of me who would never let someone step on his name again. Then I left. I got in my car, not the one we shared, but the beat-up old truck my uncle gave me years ago that she made me park 3 blocks away because it was embarrassing. It had rust in the wheel wells and duct tape on the passenger mirror. But it ran, and for the first time, it felt like freedom. I drove west. No destination. Just away. And somewhere around hour 4, somewhere past the farmland and the forgotten gas stations and the towns with more cows than people, my phone rang again. I let it buzz. Once. Twice. Then a third time. Finally, I answered. I didn't speak. And on the other end, Dahlia's voice, panicked, breathless, no performance this time, said, "Where are you? You can't just disappear. You can't do this to me. People are asking questions." I waited, then said the only sentence I could think of. "You already did this to yourself." And I hung up. What I didn't know was that the fallout was already beginning. That the people she had so carefully curated to believe her version of me were starting to ask the wrong questions. That Milo had sent a copy of the final script email to 2 of her closest friends, anonymously, of course. That quiet ripples were already forming in the glossy surface of her perfect performance. Because when you build a life out of fiction, all it takes is one truth to bring it crashing down. And I was done being fiction. I kept driving for 2 days. I didn't stop anywhere more than a night. Cheap motels, greasy spoons, gas station coffee, and roadside diners where nobody knew my name. It was exactly what I needed. Silence. Space. Time to hear my own thoughts without them being drowned out by the sound of Dahlia's voice rehearsing her next line. It was like shedding a skin I hadn't even known I was wearing. What surprised me the most was how fast peace started to settle in once I left. It wasn't immediate. I'd be lying if I said I didn't replay her voicemail or those final emails in my head. But the further I got from the city, the more distance I felt inside, too. It wasn't closure. Not yet. But it was air. And after years of emotional suffocation, that was everything. Then, on the 3rd morning, the ripple started. I was sitting at a diner in a small mountain town, staring at a plate of half-eaten eggs, when my phone lit up again, same number, different tone. It was my sister. We hadn't talked since the party. She had texted once or twice, asking if I was okay, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I wasn't angry at her, but she'd been there. She'd laughed. Even if it was polite laughter, it still burned. But something told me this call was different. So I answered. She didn't say hi. She didn't even breathe in. She opened with, "Monroe, what did you do?" At first, I froze. Thought maybe Dahlia had told everyone I ran off, emptied our accounts, left a trail of damage in my wake. But then my sister continued. "She's losing it. I mean losing it. Crying to everyone. Telling people you're mentally unstable. That you disappeared because you couldn't handle being challenged." But then the emails started circulating. My throat went dry. What emails? There was a pause. Then, "You haven't seen the thread going around, have you?" I hadn't. Milo hadn't sent anything to me. We agreed on that early. I didn't want to be part of whatever unfolded. I didn't want revenge. I wanted absence. But it seemed absence did its own damage. The email titled Final Script, the one she wrote to the event planner, had made its way through Dahlia's circle. Not from me, not from Milo, but from someone who got it from someone else who thought Monroe deserved better. It was like a chain reaction of whispers. One person leaked it to her Pilates friend. That friend forwarded it to a cousin. The cousin blasted it through a group chat. By the time it reached my sister, it had gone viral within her world. She told people it was fake, my sister added, her voice lower now, that it was AI generated. But then someone compared the formatting to email she sent last year for a charity event, exact same structure, same signature, same little emojis. I didn't say anything, just listened. I didn't feel proud or smug. I didn't feel anything close to triumph. I felt relieved, not because she was hurting, but because the truth was no longer just mine. She tried to get ahead of it, my sister said. Said you'd always been fragile, that you overreacted to harmless jokes. But then someone from the gallery staff came forward. Said she practiced the speech aloud a week before. Said they thought it was weird she never once smiled when she said anything nice, but lit up when she said the insults. I rubbed the bridge of my nose and stared out the window of the diner. Outside, a young couple was laughing over their breakfast, holding hands across a formica table. I didn't envy them. I didn't miss that kind of naive intimacy. But I did wonder if they saw each other clearly, if they ever had to question what was real. Then my sister said something I didn't expect. She called Mom. I blinked. What? She called Mom in tears. Said she never meant for it to go this far. That she just wanted to wake you up, whatever that means. Said it was all supposed to be a joke. That the guy in the voicemail was a friend helping her prepare for a speech. I closed my eyes. There it was again, the deflection, the manipulation, the desperate clinging to an image she could control. Only now, the cracks were visible to everyone. Her charm, the very thing she always weaponized, was falling flat. Because the moment people heard her words, unfiltered and raw, they couldn't unhear them. They couldn't unsee the precision of her cruelty. Even the ones who tried to defend her were quiet now. And all I had done was walk away. Later that night, Milo called. Thought you should know, he said. She's been calling around asking if you're planning to file. She knows she's lost the narrative. I asked him if she still worked with Elliot, the counselor she'd been meeting. She doesn't, he said. He resigned from his clinic last night. Rumor is, he's lawyered up. Probably trying to avoid fallout. Turns out you weren't the only husband he got too close to. That didn't surprise me. What had surprised me was how calm I felt. No fire. No rage. Just clarity. I didn't want Dahlia to suffer. I just wanted her mask to fall. And now, piece by piece, it was. I stayed on the road for 4 more days. Rented a small Airbnb near a lake. Started sketching again, something I hadn't done in over 10 years. I cooked for myself. I watched old films. I read actual books. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I heard my own voice inside my head, not hers. When I finally called my lawyer, I didn't tell him to rush. I told him to draft what was necessary. Nothing more. Nothing dramatic. Just the truth. Quiet and final. Because the best ending for someone like Dahlia wasn't rage or revenge. It was silence. It was walking away without looking back. And letting the weight of her performance collapse on its own, now that the only audience that ever mattered had left the building for good. The lake was still that morning. No wind, no birdsong, not even the buzz of a distant boat. Just silence. Deep and wide. I stood on the small dock of the cabin I'd rented, holding a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. Staring into the water, I saw myself for the first time in a long time, not as a husband, not as a mistake, not even as a victim. Just me. No labels. No script. I didn't recognize the man in the reflection at first. He looked older, but not in a tired way. In a sharper, more defined way. Like life had finally carved the truth into his face, and for once, he wasn't afraid to wear it. Dahlia had tried to shrink me. She tried to turn me into a punchline so she could stay center stage. But that's the thing about people who perform for applause. They don't know what to do when the audience leaves. And I had left. Quietly. Without drama. Without feeding her fire. That was my greatest power. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I just stepped away from the circus. And when the spotlight stayed fixed on an empty stage, everyone began to notice who had really been holding the show together. I did file eventually. The documents were clean, the process swift. No war, no bitter exchanges. Just truth. My lawyer handled it all. I gave up nothing that mattered, because nothing material did anymore. What I took with me couldn't be divided. It wasn't money. It wasn't furniture. It was freedom. It was clarity. A month later, I got an email from a mutual friend of ours. She said, "I owe you an apology." I laughed at the party. I thought it was just edgy humor. But after I saw that script, I realized it was cruelty dressed up in charm. You didn't deserve that. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. People would believe what they wanted. Some would see the truth. Others wouldn't. But that was no longer my responsibility. My life wasn't about managing other people's perceptions anymore. It was about showing up for myself, finally. And the greatest truth I uncovered through all of this? You don't have to destroy someone to heal. You don't have to get revenge. You don't have to write angry texts or expose them or scream until someone hears you. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is walk away in silence, let the lies echo off empty walls, and build something better, just for you. These days, I live quieter. I work freelance, paint again. I found a new rhythm, one that doesn't rely on someone else's approval. I stopped explaining myself to people who never listened. I started honoring the man I used to quiet down to keep the peace. And if you're reading this, if someone out there ever made you feel small, like you were just background noise in your own story, I want you to know this. You are allowed to leave the stage. You are allowed to stop clapping for someone who never applauded you. You don't need a dramatic exit. You just need the courage to stand up, take your name back, and walk toward the life that was waiting for you all along. That's what I did. And I've never looked back.